Hello, and welcome to Senior Code Review Buddy. My name is Chris, and today I'm going to talk about how I found and cleaned up some code smells that I found in a class I was working with. This class had a very misleading function name and extra responsibilities that should have been moved to their own class. This video can be viewed as a follow-up to my last video about encoding bugs, as I only noticed these smells when I was fixing that bug. You can find the link to that video in the description below if you sort of want to see what sent me down this rabbit hole. Now, the code in question is in a podcast program I've been working on for over 7 years. I haven't open sourced it yet, but I think I'm getting close. So the issue is in a file called Android Phone. So let's go over to it and take a look at the code. So this is our Android phone file, and this class is intended to handle all of the interactions with Android devices, which seems like a pretty clear responsibility. If we start skimming through it though, we'll see the first odd thing in the constructor. We've got a variable called onPhoneFolder. Now, since this class is Android phone, you'd think that everything would be related to the phone. So why do we have phone in the name here? I had to dig into this because I kind of forgot what this meant. So onPhoneFolder is actually referring to a folder on my computer. I've got a folder called onPhoneFolder, and it's basically a copy of every file that is currently on the phone. Basically, the purpose of this folder is to have a backup in case something happens to the files on my phone. So calling it onPhone isn't great, because from this description, it sounds more like a backup, right? But why is the phone aware of a backup folder? Well, let's keep going and looking at other stuff. Next, we've got copy files to phone, which, gets a list of files and I guess copies them over to the Android device. All right, so first off, we open the history file. We add some information, how many files we're copying, some information about each file. Yep, that seems reasonable, seems fine to me. And then we go here. So we go over every file. We get the destination on the phone device. We use ABD to push it onto the phone, which is a copy. And then we make sure it's successful. And if it's successful, we print that it was successful. And then we get a destination in our onPhone folder we talked about already. And we move the file there. Now, this seems odd. The function name is copy files to phone, so I wouldn't expect to move. In fact, this was how I noticed this smell in my previous changes. I was trying to write a test for this file, and unexpectedly, the files that I was passing in were getting moved. So this doesn't seem right. First off, this function needs to be clearer in the name. It should make it clear that we're copying the files to the Android device, and then we're moving them. But as I describe it like that, that sounds like two different things. We're putting them on the Android device, and then we're moving them to the backup folder. And this backup folder, it doesn't feel like a responsibility of the Android phone class. Let's see if there's any other functions that don't quite seem right here. Okay, we've got get podcast episodes on phone, which is just a single command, returns an error if we couldn't run it, and returns a result. This seems like a great function, seems to be very well encapsulated. Let's keep going. Sync phone to backup folder. Okay, first of all, this name doesn't sound great and makes me think there's probably an issue here. Because to start off, I don't really think I sync a phone to a backup folder. There is a backup folder on the computer that I keep in sync, but we don't really sync the phone to it per se. So what does this function do? So first we get all the files on the phone, handling an error if we get one. Then we go through all the files in the onPhone folder, the backup folder. And if it's a file, we see if it's not on the phone anymore. And if it's not on the phone anymore, we delete it from the PC, recording it in the history file, which is the same history file we were using to record sort of what we were copying onto the Android thing. So this history file seems overloaded now because it's got information about our backup and information about what we're putting onto the Android device. Looking at this file function, This function doesn't feel like it should belong here at all. It uses some of the input from the Android device, but this is all backup related stuff. This shouldn't live here. So this is another code smell, I think. Now that we are finished going through the file, I think it's clear there are a few smells, and they all seem to be related to the same core issue. I've got this concept of files on phone, and the Android phone code is responsible for handling it. But as I've described it, it's a backup. It's a backup folder. I've got a local backup folder for the files that I put on the Android phone. And when I describe it that way, there's no reason the Android phone or code should know anything about that backup. The code and logic should live elsewhere. Probably in a backup class. Yeah. All right. So now that I've decided on that, I think it's important to sort of talk about the work that I think I need to do and to break it into chunks. Keep things nice and small. First off, let's change the name on phone to backup. On phone isn't really clear right away, but backup is. This wouldn't be a functionality change, but I think it'll help a lot. Second, we'll create a backup history file. Instead of having Android history and backup history both live in the Android history file, we should put the backup history into a backup history file. This will be a small functionality change, and it will temporarily make the Android class look worse. This will be because we will be passing this new path into the Android phone constructor, and it will be very clear that it's doing a thing relating to backup, which isn't probably something the phone should do. So the issue we've had kind of becomes even more apparent, but we will be getting rid of this later, and while it's not ideal, I do think this is the cleanest way to sort of do it now without breaking things to start. Now we'll tackle a bigger functionality change. We'll move sync phone to backup folder to the new backup class. I think it's easier to start with this function instead of copy files to phone, because for sync phone to backup folder, it's the whole function that we're going to move over. None of that should be in the Android phone class. While for copy files to phone, it's only about half of it we move, so it's going to be a little more, maybe challenging. I think it's easier just to move the whole thing at once, and we'll start with that one. And then we'll end with addressing copy files to phone. After that, our Android phone should be completely unaware of the backup code. We will have a much cleaner and more focused Android phone class, and a new, clean, and focused backup class. Sounds good to me. Now, the first two steps, renaming phone to backup and adding backup history, went smoothly. There wasn't really any interesting thing to share with you in that work. But I did run into a bit of a challenge issue when creating the new backup class. So let's take a look at that PR. Previously, our sync phone to backup folder handled getting the files from the Android device and then using that list to sort of clean up our backup folder. But since we've now moved it into two different functions, one in backup and one still in the phone, we have to add some code to sort of bridge the two things together and interact with them together, and we've got it here. And at a glance, this seems reasonable. Yeah, we create the backup, get the files from the phone, call the backup with that. So what's the problem? And well, the problem isn't really visible here. It's when we look at the tests. Previously, we had our Android phone test, and we had tests for sync phone to backup folder. There was just a regular test, and then there was one with odd encodings. And was that? Yeah, so we had two tests there. And we have deleted all of those test lines. And I didn't add any new tests for it because of where the code is interacting now. If we go back to that, it's in my main function. And I don't write unit tests for a main function. There is some end-to-end tests now that are starting to run this, but it doesn't have unit tests. So this PR, as I landed it, decreased my code coverage. I got rid of these tests, and I didn't add anything really to replace them. Now, I do have tests for, get podcast episode on phone. I do have tests for remove unneeded backup files. These are tested. but this code here isn't tested. So there's a place that I'm not testing where I could have introduced bugs. And ideally, I shouldn't have landed this code until I had an end-to-end test or decided to add a unit test that did test this code. I didn't do that though. I did it as a follow-up PR. Now, why didn't I do it first? There's not a good reason. It's because I didn't really notice this mistake until I was about to merge this PR, and I didn't want to wait, which isn't a great reason, but it is the truth. But I did get that test coverage back. And then in my final PR, I moved all the remaining backup code from copy files to phone to the new backup class, and the split was complete. And that change was also pretty straightforward. And now my Android phone class is only dealing with Android phone stuff. If I suddenly wanted to support iPhones, it would be much easier and clearer, as I'd only need to rewrite code that actually is interacting with the phone. There isn't any non-phone specific code in that class anymore. And now it's much easier to see and also understand that I have a local backup, as there is a class with a clear name dedicated to that. Hopefully you've learned a bit about how to detect some code smells and have some better ideas on how you can remove them when you find them. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button below and subscribing. If you have any comments, code you'd like me to review, or ideas you'd like me to talk about, please leave a comment below or reach me at chris@seniorcodereviewbuddy.com. Thanks, and have a great day.